Hello, and thank you for joining us here on the Neutral Zone. I am Phil Milani, and as always, virtually though, by my esteemed colleague, my partner in crime. Really, the best way to describe this person is my everything. It's at Aric DiLalla.
Phil, great to be with you. I know we couldn't be together in person today, but just your presence, it makes everything a little bit better.
You, of course, are in a winter wonderland.
That's right. It is a cold, dark world out there.
Yeah, maybe not wonderland, just the gray skies,
Abyss.
cold. I think that we decided to do it separately because being together, it would have just been too painful.
It would have been too difficult, and our hearts couldn't handle that.
Exactly.
Quite yet. We need some more time.
Exactly. Of course, we're talking about the Broncos' 3-point loss to the New England Patriots on Christmas Eve. Chad Ryland, Aric, I did not see that coming after what transpired earlier in the game. For him to run out there, a rookie, and just drill a 56-yard field goal, I did not think that was going to happen.
Yeah, the NFL, Phil, it feels like sometimes it just has these ways of being a little bit poetic, or feels like it's scripted almost. And here's a guy that doinked an extra point. He missed a 47-yarder or something like that earlier in the game, right before halftime, and just steps right up. And Phil, that thing would have been good from 60,
70.
65. I mean, he just drilled it. And the Broncos had a heroic comeback attempt in the fourth quarter, and they get that, get a touchdown, get a 2-point conversion, get another touchdown, get a 2-point conversion, which the odds of that can't be high, right, to convert both of those 2-pointers. And then they get a 3-and-out, and 2 minutes to go. You think, hey, the Broncos are going to somehow save their season, despite how bad it looked earlier in the game. They're going to find a way to do this. It's going to be a little Christmas Eve miracle here for the Broncos. And the final 2 minutes, things just went south quickly in a hurry. The Broncos go 3-and-out. They call a couple of timeouts and are aggressive there. And the Patriots push the ball down the field. You got your best defensive player on the field, Phil Patriots, who gets beat for a catch. And then before you know it, it's just like all the energy that was in that stadium. And it was rocking there for a couple of minutes when the Broncos tied it up and then got that stop. It was like a bad dream, where it just quickly turned, and the Broncos, they got like a 4% chance left. They're not technically eliminated, but for all intents and purposes, the playoff hopes dimmed quite drastically with that kick.
Yeah, I think that maybe the most disappointing part of all of this is that everything for the Broncos this weekend had sort of fallen their way, just in terms of the other scores. Certainly early, on Saturday, and then earlier on Sunday, like everything was sort of shaping up to be a great situation for the Broncos. Even the Chiefs lost on Christmas Day. So like everything this weekend was going the Broncos' way, except the Broncos result. And what a weird game, Aric. Just the first half, it sort of felt like everything was going as we sort of expected, like a defensive battle, a low-scoring game, just 7-3. You sort of felt like the whole game was going to be that way. But then in the third quarter, the Patriots came out firing, a couple of touchdown drives. Marvin Mims has the fumble there, and that's another touchdown on special teams. But, it looked like all of a sudden the Patriots were dominating. Then the fourth quarter, the script flips again, and the Broncos come out of nowhere. And when the offense just like wasn't able to really do anything for such a long period of time, all of a sudden they exploded in that fourth quarter. And I don't know about you, Aric, but like when they got the ball back there with 2 minutes to play, there was no doubt in my mind they were going to go down and win that thing.
Yeah, no, you're right, Phil. It felt and listen, there weren't a ton of people there. I think the announced attendance was 60,000. Certainly, by the end of, with the Broncos trailing by 16 points late in the game, it wouldn't surprise me if some people headed home early to get all tucked into bed and get ready for Santa Claus. But the people that were there, I mean, the atmosphere was electric. And I think people who stuck it out were fired up. Like I mentioned, there was a buzz in the stadium, particularly after Javonte Williams gets in there for the 2-pointer. And then they got the 3 and out. Alex Singleton's firing up the crowd. He's pumping them up. And you're right, it did feel almost inevitable that the Broncos were going to find a way to win this. And the conversation was going to be about, hey, there's this huge comeback. And man, the Broncos nearly kind of threw away their playoff chances. But hey, what a heck of a win. One of the biggest comebacks, one of the biggest fourth quarter comebacks, I believe, in franchise history, had they been able to cap it off. I think it would have been the third largest fourth quarter comeback in team history. And so it felt like it was meant to be to some degree, Phil, and just it shows you that one or two plays here or there, you're not able to get there's a negative screenplay on first down on that drive that really kind of puts you in a bad spot. And then on the ensuing possession, they get 2 stops, and Sean Payton calls timeout. He said after the game, hey, I liked the way we were moving the ball. I thought we'd be able to get the ball back and push it there. But then on third down, Bailey Zappi makes a great play, and the Patriots just put themselves in position. And then you looking back, Phil, at all the moments throughout the game that could have made a difference. If Will Lutz's field goal at the end of the first half, a 57-yard attempt, it barely sneaks off to the left. If that goes in and you're up 10-3 at halftime, maybe you feel a little bit differently. Certainly Marvin Mims' fumble that was recovered for a touchdown was, clearly he was trying to make a play, make something happen. Credit to him after the game for standing there and talking to the media and taking ownership of that. But it went from 9 points to 16 points in an instant. That was a huge deal. And Phil, I know we'll want to talk about that opening goal line sequence for the Broncos, but it just felt like here and there, Javonte Williams, you're winning the football game. You got the ball in Patriots territory. Javonte Williams fumbles the ball. Ben Powers has the football, and they give it to New England. There were just a bunch of moments where if one of them goes in the Broncos' direction, maybe they win this football game.
Yeah, I mean, even Sean Payton said that after the game. He was like, hey, there's 6 or 7 moments here where if they win in the Broncos' favor, you're talking about a Denver victory. But, I think that all of those moments, you're like, okay, well, how come they didn't go the Broncos' way? And, Sean Payton talks about, the attention to detail a lot. And, this Broncos team wasn't able to quite play that clean game that they had been hoping for. And, I don't blame the timeouts there. I know there's been a lot of talk about, hey, why are the Broncos calling timeout there? But I think that if you think about it from the Broncos' perspective, the Patriots had not been able to move the ball essentially for the entire fourth quarter. So you're expecting that this thing is just they're not going to be able to drive down and get into field goal range. And even if they do, Chad Ryland, as we mentioned, had been having a tough night. So you're sort of feeling confident there. And then on the other side, you feel like you've got all the momentum offensively. I know you went 3 and out there, but you're feeling confident at that point that if you can get the ball back in pretty decent field position, that you'd be able to, even without any timeouts, go and set up maybe a long shot there. So I sort of understand being aggressive in that spot for Sean Payton there. But I mean, all of these moments, you heard from Sean on Monday say, look, we got to protect the football better. That's one thing that the Broncos were really good at during that 5-game winning streak. And, for Marvin Mims, I thought that Kurt Warner, I thought he sort of explained it well on the broadcast in the moment. He said, one thing that you talk about with young players is let's not take a bad play and make it worse. And, that return had gotten off to a little bit of a shaky start. Marvin Mims, so confident in his speed, he feels like he could, reverse the field there a little bit, change, hands with the ball and really make a nice explosive play. He's so fast, he feels like he can make those plays. But one thing you cannot do is fumble the ball right there. And gosh, that was such a huge moment where, Gesicki has that touchdown and then boom, you got the fumble. And all of a sudden you're like, whoa, what's going on here? The Patriots are like rolling. And yeah, for this Broncos team, you just can't make all these mistakes, and it doesn't matter who you're playing against in the NFL. I know the Patriots only had 3 wins, but it's still Bill Belichick. It's still a really talented defense, and you keep making these mistakes, you're just not going to win very many games.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Sean Payton, one of his messages on Tuesday, Phil, was we're still learning how not to lose football games. And he pointed out that 2/3 of games, I think he said, every week are lost before they're ever won. And I think progress is rarely ever completely linear, right? And so we during the 5-game winning streak, we looked at it and we said, look at this team. They've learned how to win. They know how to do it now. And because we pointed to games against the Raiders, against the Commanders, against the Jets, and said, no, this team now, they know how to win. And maybe it wasn't quite that simple where they're still in the middle of that learning process. They're still working toward doing it consistently. And hopefully under Sean Payton they get there, but clearly that's still something they're figuring out. I do think, Phil, one of the, not that New England played like a bad football team, but when you've got a chance to put teams away, you've got to do it. And the Broncos, especially in the first quarter, I thought had an opportunity to just put the game out of reach. Obviously, it started super well for Denver. DJ Jones gets a strip sack on the very first play of the game. And, I had no problem with going for it on fourth down there, just because it ended up flipping the field position anyway. And, a couple drives later, you're able to get a touchdown because of that field position. But, fourth down decision or not, you got to find a way to be able to get it in the end zone there. It's first and goal from the 6-yard line. You've got to be able as an offense to score there. And then you get the ball again at New England's 40 something. You got to find a way to get 10 yards and kick a field goal. It easily could have been 10-0 after 2 possessions. New England at that point has negative yardage. You do eventually go up 7-0 after a big Marvin Mims return. But Phil, to me, that was part of the story is that, maybe you're able to survive a third quarter like that if you just get ahead earlier, or maybe it forces Bailey Zappi to start taking chances he doesn't want to take, or maybe the Patriots, it's there, Phil. It's Christmas Eve. Maybe they just decide, let's just get through this one and get back. Let's get back to New England. And so I thought the Broncos missed an early opportunity to just put it away. And to me, it's not about the fourth down decision. It's not about, that sort of thing. It's just, hey, you've got 4 chances, get it in the end zone from 6 yards away. That would have been critical. It would have set the tone, I think, in a much different way. And so to me, that was a big moment, not because of the call to go for it or not go for it, but just because you've got to be able to score in that situation.
Yeah, I do think I think there's like 2 ways you could sort of view that opening sequence. There is like, hey, I think you give credit to Sean Payton for saying, let's come out here, let's be aggressive. Like you mentioned, let's try and put this thing away early. Let's establish our dominance on the ground. They were clearly trying to do that by running the ball so many times there. So I think that you can understand sort of the philosophy and the reasoning behind wanting to go for it and just say, look, let's just sort of establish that this game, it's not going to be a nice night for you guys. Let's just take care of business early on and jump on this team. I get that sort of thinking. I think on the flip side, you could sort of make an argument that, look, this is a Patriots team that does not put up a lot of points. It's early in the game. You don't really know exactly what type of game we're going to be dealing with here. Let's just take the 3 points and, who knows what's going to happen down the road. So there's 2 ways to think about it. I don't think that necessarily you could just say one is right and one is wrong. But, those are the sort of the flip sides. You can make the argument for either direction, I think, there. But I think the thing is that Sean was aggressive the whole night in that regard, just saying, look, like this is how we want to play this one. And so he stayed true to that, whether it's that going for it fourth down there or the timeouts later in the game. I think you sort of just give credit and say, look, he wants to be aggressive in these situations. And, they just weren't able to quite execute there, Aric. And I just think that offensively, I think what Sean said on Tuesday was, look, this team, just like is either average or below average in a lot of areas on offense. And, that's just not good enough, I think. And when you look at some of the flows of some of the games for the Broncos this year, a lot of times where there's like consecutive 3-and-outs where it just puts your defense sort of in a tough spot at times. And I think that, that happened on Christmas Eve, where in that first half, you mentioned it there, Eric, like they had outstanding field position, like on a lot of those drives to start the game. And if you're able to just take advantage of some of that, maybe, the rest of the game goes a different way. And, I think that that's sort of a disappointing thing for the Broncos. But yeah, just not able to stop the bleeding in some of these situations where you're like, look, maybe the Patriots open in the second half there with a touchdown. Let's respond. Let's like at least like eat up some clock. Let's just like sort of do something on offense. And for too many long stretches this season, Eric, feels like the Broncos just can't stop the bleeding.
Yeah. And again, turnovers are a big part of it, right? The Broncos lost several or fumbled it several times, lucky to only lose a couple of them. But you mentioned kind of stopping the bleeding. New England kicks a field goal to go to cut it to 7-3 early in the second quarter. And then there's you get a Russ scrambles for 14. Jaleel gets a 12-yard run. Russ finds Jaleel for another 11 yards. And before you know it, you're near the edge of field goal range. You're at the New England 38 quickly. And it's like, okay, well, hey, if we answer right back with a field goal or, obviously a touchdown to push it to 14-3 would be even better, get a double-digit lead. But even if you just kick a field goal quickly, it's kind of like, okay, New England just spent a quarter and a half or, the quarter trying to battle just to get points. And just like that, you show you can go down and push the lead right back to 7. That would have been a big moment. And even though, New England didn't end up scoring again in the second quarter, that to me was a big moment because it stalled any Denver momentum, weren't able to get back kind of in that area where you had a chance to score. And, I think any points at that juncture of the game could have made the difference just in terms of how the game played out, how aggressive the Broncos could be, what New England had to do, that sort of thing. And so that was tough. And you're right, they've got to find a way to be more consistent offensively. I do think, Phil, that you can make a reasonable argument that Courtland Sutton going out kind of threw a wrench in their plans and made things difficult. And obviously Courtland has been the go-to guy for Russell Wilson. He's been the main target in the passing game. He goes out early in the game with what's later deemed as a concussion, Phil. And clearly they needed guys to step up. Guys had to move around a little bit, and it just never quite worked the way that it needed to. But that was, I know it got mentioned when he went out, and at that point in the game, Phil, I myself was like, oh well, this if he's going to miss a game, this is a good game to miss because the Broncos are playing okay on offense. Yeah, and they're down in New England territory, and like, oh, let's just get out of here with the win. Like, this was before he knew it was a concussion. Courtland was just kind of standing on the sideline, and I was like, all right, well, we'll keep him out of the football game. And then I think it kind of got lost as the game went on that, maybe one of the reasons the offense is struggling so much is they don't have their go-to guy out there. They don't have their number one receiver. So that played a big impact, I think, on this game. Yeah,
for sure. I do think though, like in the fourth quarter, they were able to get some things going, and some people might be wondering, like, well, how come they can't play like this? In the first 3 quarters, they're able to do, really whatever they wanted in that little comeback stretch there, and you saw guys stepping up. Brandon Johnson was making big plays out there. Jerry Jeudy came alive a little bit there, and everything was sort of flowing. You got guys stepping up for Courtland Sutton's absence. And even Lucas Kroll made a nice, touchdown grab there where he went up and caught it. So, like, there are spurts here where the Broncos can really do, a lot on offense. But then there's just those dry spells. And I think that, Sean Payton said, look, our margin for error after the game, he said, is just like not where it needs to be. And, I agree with that there, just like little things, if they're not like quite perfect on it, like this team's just like not able to, sort of take advantage of all the opportunities that they have in a game.
Yeah. They're in a spot right now where it felt like earlier in the season they could survive some of these things. They weren't able to against the Patriots. Against Houston a couple of weeks ago, they did kind of survive some of these things and gave themselves a chance still, despite turning the ball over 3 times. But uh, like you mentioned earlier, it's a week to week league. Anybody can beat you. Um, our friend Mike Kliss, Phil, he asked, "Hey, is one of the next steps for this team finding ways to handle pressure situations and win games when there's a lot riding on them?" And Sean said it's more about, again, just finding ways not to lose, finding ways to win football games. But I do think that this was a new situation for a lot of guys on this team. It wasn't new necessarily for Russell Wilson. It wasn't new for like a Mike McGlinchey, but for a lot of guys, Justin Simmons, I'm not going to count Cortland because he obviously suffered the injury there, but Justin Simmons, Garrett Bowles, I mean, those types of guys, this is the first time they've played, in some of these games, or if they have, it was kind of shorthanded back in 2021 without their starter. So maybe there is something to that you've got to find a way at this time of year to be perfect or to be close to perfect. And Phil, there's a reason all these wild card teams are the ones that could have a chance of making the wild cards. They're all jumbled up at 8-7, right? And it's because, or 7-8, and it's because that's kind of where this wild card group is right now. It's teams that sometimes make the plays they need to make to win football games, but they don't do it consistently enough to be 10-5 or whatever the record would be right now. And so that's part of it too, that you have to take that next step. You have to consistently win these games. Otherwise you're going to be in this bunch. And, part of the reason that starting 1-5 was so difficult is that you don't have the margin for error to just, for lack of a better word, lay an egg in one of these games. If you started even 2-3 or 3-3, you probably could give up one like this and still have a chance. I'm sure there's like Indianapolis probably isn't happy that they went to Atlanta and played a stinker, but if they win these next two, they're going to be probably okay. They're going to make it. And so that's one of the places where put yourself in a hole at 1-5, and now it comes back to bite you when you have a game like that.
Yeah, I mean, if you really look at this Broncos season, they've really let some games drop that, now we're all the way, here in week 17, that you look back and you're like, some of these games, like they should have really won against Washington, against the Jets. These are some teams that we've now learned, are just not, I guess, very good. Like some of these teams have really struggled at times this year. And the Broncos, if you want to be a playoff team, we talk about this, Aric, is like, hey, if you want to be a playoff team, you got to take care of business against a team like the Patriots at home, with so much riding on it. And, a couple of times this year, the Broncos just haven't quite been right at that point. But I think that, like you look at other times and the Broncos went to Buffalo and beat the Bills, the Broncos handled comfortably the Cleveland Browns, and they've beaten some teams that are really good. And so I think consistency and like learning not how to beat yourself, those are like sort of the growing pains for any team. And I kind of look at this season in three groups. Aric, I look at that team that started 1-5, and then I look at the team that went on this long winning streak. And then I sort of look at the team now where you're sort of right in the wave here, where you're like up and down, up and down. And I just sort of think that that's where where the Broncos are right now. And every year teams that are right around 500, they sort of are those last few wild card spots. And I think that a game here or there, the Broncos would be in a much better position now. But they're still learning and growing, and it's the first year with Sean here, and I think that these are sort of some of the growing pains that this team, is unfortunately in a spot now where you're like, gosh, if we would have just been a little bit better here or there throughout the course of the season, they'd be in just such a way different spot. And with the way that other things have gone, like with the Chiefs or whatnot, if you had just won a couple of games here or there, you're talking about being in first place in the division, and just the way that things have gone, and that's sort of just the way the NFL is too. Like the margin for error, these teams are so close in the standings. There's only a couple of teams that are eliminated right now. And that just sort of tells you, even like look at the Raiders, Eric, where all the ups and downs that they've gone through this year, they have the same record as the Broncos, and it's just sort of let you think about how crazy this league is.
Yeah, and I mean, if the Raiders win their last two, they've got a great shot of getting in at 9-8. So you've got to be able to maintain it. I think, you mentioned the Chiefs not being so great. I think with so many backup quarterbacks playing around the league, with as healthy as the Broncos have been, obviously the injury to Cortland on Sunday night was big, but they've generally been healthy for most of the year. That's just kind of where it feels like, well, this is a little bit of a missed opportunity. Just it felt like things were aligning maybe for, your last three games were all against teams under 500, two home games with a chance to get to 9-7 and go to Las Vegas, with a chance to get to 10 wins, which, as you mentioned, Phil, the way things went Saturday and Sunday and Monday, it set up really nicely for the Broncos. It could have even been a win and in situation. And now the Broncos are in a place where you've either got to hope the Chiefs somehow lose to the Bengals and Chargers, or you've got to rely on like a 9-game string of results that, individually, none of them seem crazy, but just the odds, obviously, of all 9 going in the Broncos. Yeah, just seems unlikely. And to be honest, Phil, the Broncos probably can't even worry about that right now. They've got to make sure they regroup and find a way to play better football, play cleaner football, to beat the Chargers. And we can talk more about them later in the week, but I do still think there's value in having a winning record for the first time since 2016. And just kind of, we talked about the Lions and ad nauseum, but to say, hey, we went 8-3 down the stretch and have that sort of momentum would be, I think, helpful going into next year. And then maybe you all off season talk about and have these guys think about, hey, we were 1 or 2 plays here or there away from achieving that goal of getting back in the playoffs, and let it fuel you. But I think this feeling, Phil, this season will have a different feeling if you're not able to get these next 2, because then it might feel like, oh, well, the 5-game winning streak was like a nice, it was a nice moment. It felt good at the time, but you started 1-5 and then you finished poorly. Like, I don't think you'd look back on this season as fondly. Whereas if they can win, these last 2, I think you'd feel like at least progress was made. They're moving in the right direction, and just need to be a bit better here or there. So I still think, just in terms of the culture and what you're trying to build here and what's next, there is still a lot to be gained these last 2 weeks.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, I think that the ultimate story of this season has yet to be written. I mean, and even Sean Payton was asked about that on Tuesday, like, hey, do you talk about the playoff situation and like what scenarios need to happen here for the Broncos, or how do you address that with your team? And he was just like, look, we just got to go try to figure out how to beat the Chargers. That's really all that it comes down to, because Eric, I think that the story could either go 1 of 2 ways here. If the Broncos are able to finish with a couple of wins, you're talking about, hey, having a pretty good record against your division. You're talking about having a winning record this season. You're talking about building momentum, and you're saying, hey, look, we had a great run there to end the season, and feel like we really were able to turn the page the same way that the Lions did. The Lions going to beat the Packers to finish up the season last year, even though they didn't make the playoffs, it really carried some momentum into the offseason. And then now look at the result. They won the division this year for the first time since 93, right?
They've never won the NFC North before.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I do think that having that momentum going into the offseason is a big deal, Eric. And so I think if the Broncos are able to do that, you're talking about a nice story here for this 2023 season. Hey, maybe it doesn't result in the playoffs, but at least you've turned the page as a franchise, when you're in the position the Broncos are right now, where there's been so many years of tough times, I think if you're able to finish with a winning record, you feel like you've really changed things this year. And that's a big deal, I think. And if you don't do that and you end up, say you drop these last two games, then you're talking about squandered opportunity. You're talking about having lost 4 games in a row going into the offseason. And suddenly, instead of having that feeling of like we're building something here and we turn the page, it kind of feels like that Vance Joseph team from a couple of years ago where they go to face the 49ers when they're sitting there with a 500 record and they end up losing out. Then, a lot of people sort of forget that the Broncos are in that spot, but that because of the way that season ended. So I think a lot has yet to be determined for this Broncos team.
Yeah, and that that happened in 2022, 2021 as well, right? They were 7-6 exactly. And they lose the last 4, and you don't think back on that season as one that, where you took a step forward. Obviously, a coaching change was made after each of those, and that's not the situation. But you want to feel progress and momentum going forward into the offseason. And so I do think, and you talk about beating poor teams and teams you're supposed to beat. You should beat the Chargers coming in here with an interim head coach, with a backup quarterback. Those are the types of games you should win. And if you can go on the road, and this has been kind of the season of ending some of these bad streaks. Can you go beat the Raiders and end that streak that is now? I mean, that's just not an insignificant amount of games that you've lost to them. I think it's 7 in a row at this point. So yeah, still some things to be done that could shape how this season's looked at.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, we were in the locker room a couple of weeks ago when the Broncos were sitting there at 7-6, and we were talking to Jerry Jeudy and said, "Hey, remember you guys were in this position a couple of years ago?" And he was like, "What? I don't remember that." And I think a lot of people don't remember that. That team had a lot of success that season, but the way things ended really shape the narrative for how you remember that season. And I think that for this Broncos team, there's still a lot to be gained in these 2 weeks. You're talking about learning to not beat yourself. I think the Broncos can learn that in these next 2 weeks if they finish up strong. So definitely a lot to still play for. And hey, I mean, a lot would have to go right, but you never know in this league. And, if you just take care of the things you could control, and for the Broncos, that's going on and beating a Chargers team that, look, you beat them a couple of weeks ago. They've got an interim coach, but they almost beat the Bills this week. So, this is a team that's going to come in here and play hard and, try to change the narrative on their season too. So, but for the Broncos, you got to take care of business here. And then that streak against the Raiders, you end that. I think you can head into the offseason feeling pretty good, even if the playoffs aren't part of this picture.
Yeah, so I agree.
Well, we'll definitely get into the Chargers matchup a little bit later on this week, and then also talk about, what things to watch for in specifically here with the Broncos. I think there's still, some things that you could pay attention to, some younger guys, some guys that you want to see finish the season strong. Certainly see how Russ is able to bounce back after a couple of tough games here for the offense. And, if they can come out and just have a little bit of an explosion and have a nice game, I think that's something that you could really take some positives from too. So definitely a lot to talk about and unpack here, Aric, with the final 2 games. And we'll do that coming up later in the week. Aric, did you have a nice holiday? We certainly hope that NZ Nation did.
I did, Phil. I hope you did too. And yeah, very happy holiday to all our listeners, and glad you're with us today as we talk through this one.
Yeah, exactly. Wishing a happy holiday to all of NZ Nation. And hey, we're looking forward to the new year where the Broncos have a couple of games here to wrap up 2023 and head into the offseason with some momentum. So that is going to do it for us. Aric, I think you have to go shovel, right? What do you got going on back there?
That's right. A lot of snow here to get rid of.
We missed the white Christmas by one day.
Oh.
Missed opportunity. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us. For Aric DiLalla, I am Phil Milani. You've been listening to
The Neutral Zone.